The town I live in is nice enough. It's quiet, a little quaint. My dream is to move to the city once I graduate from college. I want a life where things are busier, more exciting, more alive. I live at home with my parents and my twin sister. Both of my parents are underpaid teachers, so our upbringing has been relatively modest. We've never been spoiled. We've always been told to work hard for every dollar, and gratitude for everything we have has been instilled in us since childhood. My parents must have worked really hard to save money throughout these years, because the house that we've lived in since I was a teen is pretty darn huge. Our tiny little town in general is relatively prestigious. I went online to search up the prices of houses in our neighborhood, and wow. So, I do my part to extract wisdom from my parents whenever possible. Clearly, they know a thing or two about how to win at life. Of all of the things my parents ask of me and my sister, the rule they are the most stern about is, if you're going downstairs after midnight, you have to bring someone with you. Ever since we first moved to this house, they would remind us of this rule every chance they got. They'd randomly bring it up at the dinner table or before we'd go off to school. Sometimes, if they heard footsteps in the hallway at night, one of them would get up from bed and walk with us to wherever in the house we were going. The strangest thing about it was that me and my sister never really had any reason to go downstairs at night anyways. Our rooms, the living room, the kitchen, and pretty much everything else we used was upstairs. Sure, downstairs had a games room and some stuff we maybe needed to pull out from storage from time to time. But overall, I couldn't really think of a scenario where we'd need to go downstairs after midnight. My sister and I would ask my parents about it sometimes. Why do we have this rule? What happens if we break it? They would usually deflect, change the subject, or say, "We'll tell you when you're older, dear." As I got older and older, the fact that my whole family slept upstairs, in a large 2-story house, mind you, became increasingly weird to me. I was curious about what exactly was going on. So fresh off my 20th birthday, I decided to conjure up a situation where I'd absolutely need to head downstairs after 12 a.m. "Mom, I left my laptop in the games room and I need to polish up a paper that I'm submitting tomorrow." Lame excuse, I know. She was skeptical and pushed back a little bit. "Can I get up early tomorrow and finish up the essay in the morning?" Why did I leave this assignment until the last minute? I was able to assuage these questions pretty easily. I thought it was due 2 days from now. I thought my laptop was in my room. I'm a little bit stressed and I won't be able to sleep if I don't finish it, etc., etc. So she ultimately obliged. We made our way down the small staircase and arrived at the door leading to the downstairs area. Before my mother opened it, she turned to me. "Okay, he's likely going to latch on to me. Make sure I don't open the door to the backyard, okay? Make sure I'm with you at all times. You can pull me if you need to." I thought she was kidding. She opened the door. Our downstairs area has another small living room, a small kitchen, and a hallway that leads to our games room and our storage area. I'd accidentally left my laptop in the games room, so as we entered, I immediately turned towards the hallway. I thought my mom would follow me. Instead, I saw her just standing there, shivering, jittery. Her gaze was fixed on the window in the kitchen. It's a big window with the blinds usually pulled up. The window was a peek into our large, mostly empty backyard. I looked at my mom confusedly as she continued her uninterrupted stare. Slowly, she started walking to the door to our backyard. "Mom, what are you—" That's when I saw him, pressed against the window from the outside. His face was obscured by the darkness, but I could see his eyes, wide open, wider than eyes should go, otherworldly. He looked focused, excited. My mom continued walking to the door. I grabbed her as hard as I could and pulled her away, back to the staircase leading upstairs. I closed the door behind us. It took my mom a moment to snap out of it. She spent another minute staring at the door to the downstairs area. meekly trying to open it and go back to where she was previously walking to. When she finally pulled herself together, what the fuck was that? Did you get your laptop, hun? Mom, what the fuck was that outside the window? Mom's reaction was weird, a mix of annoyance, concern, and fear. She finally responded, "Terrible things happen when we talk about him too much. As long as we go downstairs in pairs of two, we're always okay. No one's let him in yet." And that was that. I continued asking her as we made our way upstairs, but she just flat out ignored me at this point. I had no idea what to do. I wanted to tell my sister, who was generally super carefree, but part of me thought that it had only freaked the hell out of her and achieved nothing. I tried bugging my dad about it, but he also deflected. At most, sometimes he'd say something like, "We just wanted to make sure we could give you and your sister a comfortable upbringing," and then walk away. What the fuck? It's been 2 years since me and my mom went downstairs together after midnight. Since then, we've continued to follow the rule, and we'd thankfully never run into any problems. I've tried to convince my parents that we should think about downsizing and moving somewhere else, but they'd always say stuff like, "That isn't how this works, dear, and as long as we play it safe after midnight, we'll be okay." That brings me to why I'm writing this today. My parents have been gone for the week, visiting family in another state. My sister left earlier this evening to go to a sleepover with her best friend. I'm home alone for the first time in forever. I don't usually have my phone on me. It takes me a couple of hours at least to read and respond to text messages. I've always been lazy about it. I recently took a look at my phone to see a missed text message from my sister. "Hey, I might have accidentally left the downstairs door open. Just an FYI. Please close it whenever you get a sec." She sent this text message 4 hours ago. I read it at 10 minutes past midnight. I'm writing this from the closet in my room. So far, I think I'm okay. Maybe she's misremembering and she kept the door shut. The only thing I'm worried about is that I'm starting to shiver a little bit, and I have this inexplicable urge to get out from my hiding spot so that he can find me. Probably the earliest memories I have of my life are story time. Dad would sit in his special seat in his room, and I'd sit cross-legged on the floor. Story time was important. Story time was special. Story time couldn't be skipped. Every night. It was a ritual, an event. I liked it mostly. He'd often read from picture books. He'd always shuffle in new ones. Stories about animals, leaves, gremlins, ghouls, talking clouds, all that good stuff. As a young kid, I didn't realize just how weird it was for him to have so many darn kids' books at his disposal. Anyways, there was one important rule that always came with his nightly storytelling. Whenever he shared a tale, I wasn't allowed to get distracted. In the earlier years, it felt like he was much more lax about this. If I yawned or dozed off, he was pretty forgiving. But if I interrupted him, saying I was hungry or bored or wanted to play video games, he'd shut me down quickly. He'd stare at me from his chair, an intense, angry glare. Then, with my full attention, he'd simply say, "What would the uninvited guests think about this?" Naturally, I didn't have a great answer to this question. At first, I assumed it was just an expression akin to saying it's raining cats and dogs, some phrase that sounded like nonsense, but one that I'd understand when I was older. Either way, I ended up becoming a pretty good listener after months of this ritual and started to really relish these moments with my dad. The stories themselves were boring, sure, but he'd always work hard to spice them up with great pacing and impassioned voice acting. It wasn't until I turned 9 that his storytime rules became much stricter. At this point, if I got itchy and looked down at my arm to scratch it, he'd snap his fingers, then glare. What would the uninvited guests think about this? If I noticed a snowfall happening outside, my eyes briefly darting to the window, it would be another snap of his fingers, another disapproving look, and another mention of uninvited visitors. I'd even learned to stare right at him, nodding intently at the appropriate story beats while my mind was off wandering about something else. Still, he'd somehow be able to catch it. Innocently, I brought this up to some of my close friends at school, who found the whole thing, including the fact that he still read stories to me, nightly even, a bit weird. My curiosity flamed, and I brought it up to him at dinner one day. "Dad, why is story time so important?" He didn't look up to answer, fork with mashed potatoes in one hand, that day's paper held out in front of him in the other. "It'll make you smarter. When you grow up, you'll be thankful about it." The answer didn't really quell my curiosity. I pressed on a bit more. "And you really need me to pay attention the whole time?" "Yes, without a doubt." Not a particularly detailed answer from the old man. If this paints a strange picture about my pops, I do want to make something very clear. He was a great dad. He was always there when I needed him, whether it was for help on my homework or as a shoulder to cry on for something my 9-year-old self thought was the end of the world. He was supportive with all my hobbies, dorky as they were, and never seemed interested in forcing a particular world view on me. There were only 2 topics he was guarded about, talking about my mom, who died giving birth to me, and of course, the stories. Once I hit 10, he ditched the picture books altogether. The next stories were all ones he came up with himself. They were interesting, to say the least. I can recall a few of them that left greater impressions on me, for reasons I'll get into soon. The first was the story about the werewolf who should have known better. This werewolf had sharp teeth, sharp claws, and a big heart, like all the werewolves that came before him. He'd heard all the tales about townsfolk crying foul about the wolves and blaming them for various ills, but he brushed them aside. This werewolf was an optimist. One fateful day, he climbed down the hill to finally greet the townsfolk, but they chased him out with pitchforks and rocks. He realized quickly, much as he wished it weren't the case, that things hadn't changed. His story would be the same as those of wolves from generations past. The second story was about a boy who would freeze up in terror whenever there was an earthquake. Rather than dropping under the table and covering his head as he was supposed to, he'd instead stop in place, unable to move an inch. Noticing this, his mother decided to calm him with a story. Earthquakes, big and small, she told him, were all caused by a friendly giant in the sky. Small rumblers meant the giant was exorcising, and bigger quakes meant the giant was bouncing on a trampoline. The stories were silly, but they helped the boy find some relief, and soon he was able to consistently drop, cover, and hold, all while visualizing a fantastical picture in the sky. The most important story of the bunch was one he decided to save for a special night. At this point, I'd become the perfect listener. It was routine and instinct, and nothing could distract me. Even as my dad's storytelling antics got stranger and stranger, he'd turn the TV on midway through a tale and start slowly lifting the volume. He'd walk around the room as he spoke, bouncing a ball against the wall with increasing force. And, strangest of all, he'd sometimes bring large stuffed animals into the room that he would hide behind as he told the story. I barely slipped up. Sometimes the face of a particular stuffed animal would pop out to me, or my eyes would be drawn to follow the movement of the ball he was bouncing. He'd always catch me. He'd always notice. He'd always say the line. What would the uninvited guests think about this? Finally, I asked him, "Who are the uninvited guests?" He broke into a big smile. It stretched across his face with an unsettling curve, like a caterpillar, like his cheeks were being pulled. Then he shook his head. "There's still time," he said, and there was, indeed. The night of the party wasn't for a few weeks. When it finally rolled around, it was a sight to behold. I never knew my dad had so many friends. They were all laughing, friendly, mingling, shaking hands, looking at the pictures around our house, eating, a gathering of sophisticated-seeming adults. None of them paid much attention to me at first. I assumed this event wasn't a big deal. Dad had mentioned briefly that some folks might come over to our house in the near future. I still remember the look on his face when they arrived. It was an expression I'd never seen him wear before. He tensed up, a half smile on one side of his face. His eyes looked like they were welling up with tears as he squinted. I never quite knew what it meant. After dinner, the guests all started breaking off into some strange behavior. A few of them were staring up at the ceiling in our living room, spinning ever so slightly in place as they did. I saw a group of 5 or so just standing in the bathroom, not really doing anything. One of the guests, a gentleman in a fine suit, started climbing up the stairs on all 4s. When he got to the top, he'd walk back down to the bottom and then start again. A few others followed him. It didn't dawn on me that something was wrong until I saw one of the stranger's smiles dripping blood. I thought my brain was making things up, but then someone down the hall looked at me and waved with a similar tinged smile, red droplets flicking down from her teeth. I saw it more and more upon the guests and cried for my dad. He found me, grabbed my hand, and pulled me into his room. "It started," I heard him mutter to himself in a whisper. He shut the doors behind him and barricaded the entrance as I continued crying. "It's story time, all right?" he said. I was rattled beyond belief, but the words brought me a light comfort. He sat in his special chair, the one he always sat in. Then he told me the story about Patrick Bear and the uninvited guests. I tried my best to listen intently. On one special day, Patrick found out that he was throwing a party. That was news to him. I felt a force pushing against the door. The guests rolled in one by one, more than he could have ever imagined. They were already inside. They spilled into the room, wandering. I averted eye contact with them. My dad shot me a knowing, mindful look. I was doing what he wanted. They had big hats and big ties and fancy shoes, but Patrick Bear didn't care. A clutter of strangers gathered behind my dad's seat. They peeked their heads out to look at me. The others started sitting around me in a circle. They left only a small gap for me to lock eyes with my father. Through my blurry peripheral vision, I could sense all of their eyes were fixed on me. Patrick just wanted his alone time, so fancy friends didn't mean much to him. The whispers of the strangers were the hardest part. "Look here. Do you want to have a staring contest?" "Look away for just 1 sec," they all said in different variations. The guest stayed longer than he would have liked. The bloodied smile of a stranger crept up right in front of me. I kept my dad's gaze with the 2-inch gap to the stranger's left that had been afforded me. But eventually I saw my dad's neck slowly twist. His eyes had averted from me. They looked upwards now, towards a woman that was hovering in front of him. I heard cracks and snaps. The strange caterpillar smile returned to his face as his cheeks pulled in opposite directions. Blood pooled from his mouth. He briefly looked at me again, now with an apologetic gaze. "I'm sorry, my sweet one. I had to look at your mother." His face and neck contorted in ways that didn't even make sense, but he was able to slip out one final line. How do as they story in Ed. Something in my gut knew that closing my eyes wasn't the answer. I was covered by the strangers, but still I somehow looked ahead. Somehow they were a blur. I couldn't look away from them, but my attention wasn't with them. It was with the story. But eventually they all went home, and Patrick Bear found peace and quiet. "Once again," I said. A breeze blew through the window. The room was suddenly still. The house was empty. Everyone was gone. There was no sign of anything. No family photos, no children's books, nothing I recognized. Just generic furniture. When the cops found me days later, starved and confused, the story was that I was an orphan boy with no traceable lineage. Everything I told them about my dad, my upbringing, story time, and more couldn't be proven in any way. I talked about my school, about the teachers and friends I had there, but no one mentioned could recall ever knowing me. For a while, I was convinced that I'd made up the whole thing in my mind, that I'd been abandoned by my parents when I was young, fled from an orphanage, and squatted in uninhabited properties living an imagined life, a storybook of my own. The events of that final night of story time and the insanity I encountered were proof that I'd merely decoupled from reality as a child. Unfortunately, like the werewolf, I learned a painful lesson when my wife Meredith died while giving birth to our son Michael. Through the sheer shock and horror of it all, I tried to convince myself that it was just a disturbing cosmic coincidence. But then a package from nowhere arrived at my front door a few weeks after her passing. It was a fully illustrated storybook. It was called Michael Bear and the Uninvited Guests. On the first page, in the inner lining of the book, there was a note scribbled in it. It read, "We can't wait for the party. We'll bring all our friends, love, Meredith, Mom and Dad. I can't say for certain when the party will be, but if history is anything to go on, the uninvited guests will show up around my son's 10th birthday. And so, to prepare, we do story time every night. After all, it's important. It's special. It can't be skipped. It's a ritual, an event. And every time he complains about it, I give him the reminder. What would the uninvited guests think about this?" You know that meme about how presidents and governors, after getting elected, look super shell-shocked and stressed the next time they make a public appearance? Like the first thing that happens after you come into power is that you're pulled into a room and told all of the secrets of the world? Well, turns out it's true. As a matter of fact, it's a VHS tape. The 4-hour tape was always a bit of an urban legend at the office. I'll be keeping the details of my role in government very, very vague. But to be absolutely clear, I am very low level. My role is caked between layers of bureaucracy, and in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty inconsequential role. When you're working at my level, you're generally not privy to any high-level secrets. Yes, top-secret meetings did occasionally happen in our building, but my focus is pretty limited and heavily administrative. So, you do what any other department does when you're in the bottom rung of the hierarchy. You discuss rumors, rumblings, crazy conspiracy theories, and everything in between. It's water cooler conversation for us. Man, I wonder what the folks at the top are doing right now. That kind of stuff. Out of all of the rumors that fluttered around the office, the 4-hour tape was always the one I found the most fascinating. The crux of it. Once you reach the highest clearance level, you are sat down and shown this tape. None of us knew what the contents of the tape were, or if a tape like this even actually existed, but it was fun to speculate about it every now and then. Most of the time, we found with our little rumors and conspiracy theories that the most mundane answer was usually the correct one. Life, in general, finds a way to surprise us with how boring everything can be. Now, there's something you should know about me before I continue. I'm a wimp. I'm meek, anxious, and generally restless. I'm a chronic rule follower. There is no part of me that wants to dig up secret documents and uncover the truth about what happens at the highest levels of government in our country. So when I discuss the events of 4 nights ago, please be mindful of that. I didn't ask for this, and I'm only sharing because I don't know how much time I have left anyway. And I can't live with this stuck in my conscience, alone. It was nighttime at the office. I'm known to be a bit of a chronic workaholic, and there was something I really wanted to get done before the week was over. So I was working later than usual. I went to print a document on what I thought was the printer in my immediate vicinity. The notification on my computer showed that my document was being printed, but I didn't hear any noise or paper coming out from my local printer. I checked the name of the device I selected, and it looked like I'd accidentally clicked on a printer that was being used on another floor. I sighed. In any normal circumstances, I probably would have just forgotten about that mistake and reprinted the documents on my local printer again. But Our general management here is quite stringent on us, making sure that all confidential documents are accounted for. We are not allowed to share department-specific documentation to other departments. Fuck it, I thought. I looked up a map in my inbox showing the locations of all of the company printers. Turns out, I'd accidentally clicked on the printer named Prince Charming on the 7th floor. Huh. Funny name. Off I went. I really should have just let it be. I got to the elevator and rode it up to the 7th floor. I emerged onto the mostly empty office area. In case you were wondering, the building I work in is huge, but I'd worked there long enough to know my way around it, so I knew the area surrounding the printer relatively well. I made my way through the hallways and eventually spotted the printer with my freshly printed papers minting it. I gave myself a mental pat on the back for continuing my lifelong streak of following the rules. As I went to grab the papers, I noticed some light buzz in a meeting room nearby. I looked through the window to see roughly 10 people hanging out around a snack table. In the room was a large, old-looking TV on a cart, and rows of some of the fanciest folding chairs I'd ever seen, organized in a neat fashion. I didn't think much of it, and started walking off until I heard the door open. "Hey, Mr. Boskowitz, right? Jesus, man, we were supposed to start 15 minutes ago. Get in here." What? No, sorry, I think you have the wrong. I don't care why you're late, just get in here. Grab a plate of snacks and sit down. We're starting soon. Put your phone in the bag, electronic watch in the bag, and anything else on your person that can be used to record audio or video. He responded hastily. Something about his sternness and tone short-circuited my brain. For guys like me, there is a third option beyond fight or flight. It's called the just go with it until it's over, also known as the captured rabbit strategy. I put my phone and my watch in the bag. I meekly tried to butt in with another, "Sir, I'm not Mr. Boskowitz," but he had already pulled me into the room at this point. He closed the door and walked to the front by the TV. I thought about making a break for it, but I decided to just see it through at this point, hoping deep down that whatever was happening was as inconsequential as my job was. Everyone had their snack plates and were heading to their seats. I awkwardly grabbed a muffin from the snack tab, put it on a napkin, and took a seat in the very back row. Everyone was spaced out from each other. It didn't seem like any of these folks knew one another. I quietly sighed at the thought of having to sit through some sort of boring informational seminar or irrelevant training session. After a few minutes of everyone settling in, the man who originally brought me into the room started talking. There was an equally serious guy standing next to him, and a Secret Service-looking fella standing in the corner. I started wondering to myself why we were going to watch a video off of a very old-school-looking TV. Felt like we were all back in elementary school or something. All right, I just need to do a final run-through before we get started, the man at the front said. I know you all read through the emails and signed your releases. I just wanted to recap some ground rules. You're allowed to get up and grab another snack, but beyond that, we want you to pay full attention to the tape once it starts playing. If any of you need to go to the bathroom, we strongly urge you to wait until the presentation is over. If you absolutely have to go, we will pause the tape and one of us will escort you. There is water in the corner by the snacks. Cups are right there as well, and goes without saying. But any discussion of this presentation to folks who do not have top compartmented clearance is a breach of your terms of employment, a breach of your non-disclosure agreement, a breach of your multiple signed releases, a breach of the U.S. Criminal Code in the state of redacted, and a breach of the conditions laid out by the Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness. They started dimming the lights. Fuck. It felt like I had missed any window of opportunity. I had to leave. Too late. That committee name he highlighted sounded way above my clearance level. One of the men at the front of the room pulled out a VHS tape from a bag and very slowly and securely put it into a VHS player. He pressed play. I took a deep breath. Those water cooler conversations I'd had with my coworkers were starting to float to the top of my mind, but I quelled them. There was probably no need for panic. It was just a stupid government meeting, right? The tape started. The beginning was familiar enough. Various disclaimers about this being incredibly confidential material, yada yada yada, insignias of relevant organizations, presidential libraries, etc. I'd seen lots of videos like this already, but wait, that insignia looked strange, like something was off. I scanned it. Presidential libraries, that same eagle, those same stars. Weird. This time, there was a navy blue hand on the left shoulder of the eagle. Did they update the logo? Before I had time to ruminate on it too much, the tape cut to a logo I had actually never seen before. Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness. The logo was just an image of planet Earth. Fair enough. The video cut to a room that looked similar to the Congress floor, but with some strange differences. Seats were much more spaced out. The podium looked like it had seen better days, and the whole room looked to be on a pretty steep incline. Everything was in black and white. It looked like there were about 50 people in attendance. It was hard to make out the faces. Everything looked very dated, like the video was from the 40s or the 50s. The tape lingered on this one shot for quite a while. Minutes passed. I noticed what looked to be a choir, all in outfit and perfectly huddled next to each other, standing in one of the corners of the room. It really felt like I shouldn't have been seeing this. None of this was meant for my eyes. After a few more minutes, the tape abruptly cut to an awkward angle video of a man speaking at the podium in the room. It was too zoomed in, enough that you couldn't see his eyes or his hair. It didn't look all that professional. I couldn't tell who he was. He spoke. Members of the Committee for the Protection and Preservation of Human Consciousness, I thank you all for coming tonight. We are lucky to be in the good graces of our visitors today, without rehashing our painful history. The tape cut to a camera slowly panning over all of the faces of the folks seated in the room. The attendees looked pained, somber. The man continued his speech as the camera continued panning over the committee. We can acknowledge that the journey to this moment has been an arduous one. I am pleased to say that humanity, faced with a dire ultimatum, has come to a majority decision. To our esteemed guests from across the solar system, we are thankful for the opportunity you have given us to negotiate with you. I felt adrenaline. Fuck. We had made contact with extraterrestrial life. This was the truth. Maybe, like the saying went, the truth would set me free. Before I outline the decision taken by humanity, I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank the brilliant representatives from all of the nations of the world who came together to ensure that this decision was taken with utmost responsibility, care, and appreciation for our human species. I am aware that this was not a unanimous decision. Shit, what did that mean? I felt the sweat on my brow. I felt nausea coming in. I awkwardly and slowly took a bite of the muffin. The tape returned to a now corrected angle of the speaker at the podium. His eyes were visible. They looked strained, like they'd seen multiple versions of hell. To the nations who still disagree, he continued, I thank you nonetheless for accepting the majority decision. May this moment, which will be held in secrecy throughout the rest of time, be appreciated as a critical milestone for human civilization. Tonight is not a victory. It is a somber moment. However, we were faced with two options: extinction or accepting the agreement. We made our choice, and I believe time will show that this was the right decision. What was this? I hereby announce that we accept the agreement provided by our special guests who have chosen to go by the name Redacted. The intergalactic species known as Redacted will allow humanity on planet Earth to continue to populate grow, and innovate. In return, all governments of the world will honor the promise. He needed to spit it out. What the fuck was this agreement? We will not be covering every element of the agreement in this session. I will, however, highlight the main points. At this point, the video showed the man at the podium looking down. He was reading off of something. For the first time, he looked nervous, scared. I saw some humanity in him. We honor the agreement that Redacted hold the right to visit planet Earth on a recurring basis. They will be allowed to consume, for the basis of nourishment, a majority of the human population on planet Earth. After every visit, the remaining humans on Earth will be expected to breed and grow to capacity in time for the next visit. We acknowledge that we will maintain a parallel history, which will be shared with our world's population, to ensure that humanity stays motivated to continue existing as a species. This parallel history may suggest that mass extinction events are the results of man-made folly, as opposed to the work of external forces. For the first time, my fight, or flight response, was actually flight. I wanted to escape, but I didn't know what I'd even be running from. The last visit by Redacted was approximately in the year 1346, and it lasted 7 years. We will continue to honor our parallel history about this event. I just wanted it to end. The next visit, which will not be met with resistance, will be in the year 2028, and will run for 1 full calendar year on Earth, marking a 675-year gap between the last significant visit by the species known as Redacted. This visiting cadence is expected to speed up over time as the remaining humans continue to sharpen their focus on building technology to allow humanity to reproduce in a speedy and productive manner. Jesus Christ, our planet is a fucking farm. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The tape cut away to a larger view of the Congress-like room, the somber committee members in attendance, and the members of the choir in the corner, who I could only imagine looked horrified. Where were the visitors? Why couldn't I see them? The camera then panned to a number of larger, empty seats, the same slow style of video panning as the one that happened earlier with the committee members. No visible entities in the seats, but the seats themselves looked blurry. The man at the podium carried on with his speech as the camera pan on those blurry seats continued. We should acknowledge the privilege of knowing that there is indeed life in the cosmos, that extraterrestrial life has chosen to visit our planet, and that the cycle and balance provided by nature extends beyond the confines of planet Earth. Much like humanity has found its place on Earth in the food chain, we acknowledge our place in the divine order of things when encountered with beings of greater power, understanding, cognitive function, and evolutionary progression. Fucking hell. I shouldn't have stayed late at work. I should have made my identity clear from the very beginning. I knew that I wasn't supposed to see this. And wow, fuck, it really looked like the speaker was about to cry. While the process of consumption, is a painful and lengthy one, we respect the trade-off that comes with the preservation of our species. We also acknowledge, as part of the promise, that substitutes for human life in the form of clones, should we discover that technology in the future, or other living species, will never function as viable alternatives for nourishment, the speaker continued. I didn't need to know this. This whole thing was way too specific for me. Our final major acknowledgement, as part of this agreement, is that we accept Redacted as the Great Almighty, as the entities we will now refer to as God. God, as an interstellar species, has revealed itself to us, and thus the continued existence of Redacted is now the true priority of the people of our planet. We are blessed to play a part in the continuation of God. In God we trust. Amen. The tape then cut to footage of the choir as the speaker continued. We bless our visitors with this gift, a performance of the national anthems of all major nations of the world will now commence. Audio of a very loud backing track of the Star-Spangled Banner started playing from the video as my stomach sank. The tape showed footage of the choir singing on top of the track. Not sure if it was because they were scared for their lives, but I could really tell they were singing their hearts out. As they sang, the camera continued to pan over the blurry seats. They finished singing the anthem, and suddenly, fast-forwarding, fucking hell, I had forgotten I was sitting in a room. I had disengaged from the video for a brief moment. I had mentally returned to the present day. This was our world. This was our fucking lives. The men at the front continued fast-forwarding through the tape. It looked like they were skipping through performances of the other national anthems. The fast-forwarding went on for a while. Every small while, it looked like a new choir group was entering the Congress-like room to sing a different national anthem. On and on the tape went. I had to fight the urge to pass out. One of the men at the front of our room, standing next to the TV, started speaking up. "We are legally obligated to get to the end of this tape, but you don't need to look at the rest of it. Please feel free to look down, or close your eyes, or grab a snack," he said. I noticed the others seated in the room were taking that advice. Most of them decided to look straight down. For some weird reason, I couldn't look away. The fast-forwarding progressed. On the tape, it was yet another choir group joining to perform an anthem, and then another, and then another. It looked like we were near the end. The fast-forwarding now showed a conversation between the man at the podium and another man who was whispering in his ear. The man at the podium was vehemently shaking his head. The other man continued whispering. This continued on. Eventually, there was a quick moment of the man at the podium begrudgingly nodding. The last few fast-forwarded moments of the tape remain burned in my memory to this very moment. They were pandemonium. The attendees were sitting in their chairs, frozen, shivering, crying. The people in the various choirs were running around the rooms in fast motion. As blurry spots started covering them, and ungodly things started happening to them. Fuck. Why didn't I look away? If ever there was a fucking time to follow orders, it felt like the whole thing went on for longer than it should have. Finally, the men at the front of our room stopped the fast-forwarding. They pressed play on the tape to cover the very final moment. In the tape, the man at the podium, clearly emotional, spoke his final line. "The agreement has been ratified by redacted. Thank you all for attending." The final shot of the video is the full room, the committee members in their seats, shivering and crying. The dismantled and bloodied choir members strewn about the room. The blurry seats with blood smeared on them. The video then cut away, back to that same insignia on a black backdrop. The presidential liveries, that eagle, those stars, the navy blue hand on the wing of the eagle. The lights in our room turned on. The rest of the night was a blur. The men at the front of the room told us it was best for us to sit for an hour to digest the information. No discussion about the video was allowed to take place. When we were ready to stand, we were allowed to leave and go home. They gave us some pointers on how to accept the information over the coming weeks. Things like taking long walks, exercising, watching a sitcom, etc. I wasn't worried about them realizing that I wasn't supposed to be there. If anything, I felt a strange camaraderie with everyone in the room. We were all, truly, in the same boat. As soon as I left the building and got in my car, I just drove. For as long as I could, I would stop for gas. Then I'd keep driving. I'd stop again. Then I'd keep driving. Again and again. I'm holed up in a hotel now. I'm just glad I could get this off my chest. The funny thing is, all I can think about is the length of that stupid tape. While I can't confirm, I feel like if it were played straight through without fast-forwarding, it would have only been 3 hours. I wonder if the 4-hour tape rumor came from the fact that we all needed that extra hour to digest the information. And now, you're probably wondering, why don't I name the species that is going to spell humanity's doom throughout the rest of time? Why am I calling them redacted? Well, as the self-appointed leader of the committee for the acknowledgement that we should have just chosen extinction, I don't feel the need to honor our captors by calling them by their name. If I don't see you again, Reddit, I appreciate the water cooler conversation. I'm using this post to chronicle the events of this evening, as they have been truly fascinating. Some quick backstory. The small section of the city that me and my friends live is generally known to be haunted. And even if you're not a believer in the supernatural, it's at least a bit eerie. I'm not going to dox myself by stating the location, but let's just say that creepy sightings and murders, deaths, due to unexplainable circumstances, are our bread and butter. For most people, this means you move away as soon as they can. For folks like me and my friends, who absolutely love all things spine-chilling, it generally makes for a pretty good time. Our Halloween parties are awesome. Most of our drinking nights have some sort of spooky game interlaced into them. And if you have literally nothing to do on a Friday night with your friends, you can always go on a tour of some of our haunted locales, graveyards, abandoned buildings, creepy forests, you name it. So, with that background established, let's cut back to tonight. Me and my closest 3 pals decided to try our hand at using a Ouija board. Were we going to be normal and try the Ouija board in one of our family attics? Nah, too basic. We instead decided to trek up together to, what I shit you not, is an abandoned treehouse left in an elevated section of our city, surrounded by forests. What could go wrong, right? We climbed up to the treehouse, set down a spooky-themed rug, lit some candles, and brought out the Ouija board. Despite my pretty extensive resume of dealing with all things creepy, I'd never actually tried a Ouija board before, so I was really excited to see what would happen. We went into this excited to break every rule in the book. We weren't going to do a seance. We were going to ask whatever we want, and we didn't need to worry about being respectful to the spirit, etc. We figured if something interesting were to happen, it'd be more likely if we went in as carefree as possible. We sat in a circle around the Ouija board and got started, asking the simple question, is there a spirit with us? With all of our hands placed on the planchette. No real response. We fluttered the planchette in a few different directions, but we could tell we were kind of forcing it. We asked a few other questions. What is your name? When did you die? Etc. But nothing really came of it. After trying for the next half hour and not really getting anything in the form of a response, we decided that we probably didn't have any spooky luck tonight, and opted instead to share scary stories in the treehouse. We left the Ouija board out just in case we'd get luckier later in the night. Amidst a break in our storytelling where everyone was grabbing drinks and snacks from their bags, I decided to give the Ouija board another quick go. I placed my hand on the planchette alone and whispered the following question. Will you please grace us with your presence tonight? Surprisingly, the planchette started moving. It's hard to explain, but you kind of know when something is moving on its own, versus you sort of subtly and subconsciously moving it with your hand to force an answer. This felt real. A tingle went up my spine. It was cool as hell. My hand was moved to the following letters. Yes. Awesome. I looked over to the group and told them that the Ouija board was working again. Excitedly, we all huddled around and placed our hands on the planchette. I followed up with another question. Where are you from? We sat there excitedly waiting for something. Instead, nothing. The planchette was still. The lack of any sort of external force with us was very, very obvious. Disappointing, but I had an idea I wanted to follow up with. I turned to my friend Kevin and asked him, do you want to try doing it solo? It worked for me. Kevin was confused, but he decided to give it a try. We all backed up to give him some space with the Ouija board. He placed his hand on the planchette and repeated my question. Where are you from? His expression changed to shock as his hand started moving with the planchette. He turned to all of us and mouthed, I'm not doing this, to which I excitedly mouthed back, I know. I pulled out a notepad and recorded the answer as the planchette went from letter to letter. I recorded the following. Not important. Love it. A spirit with some sass. I asked Kev to back up for a sec as I approached the Ouija board, prepped for one final solo question. I asked, "Why are you only responding when it's one of us using the board?" Yet again, the planchette moved effortlessly with my hand. It was faster this time, so I said the letters out loud and had another one of my friends, Eleonora, transcribe onto my notepad. The answer was, one at a time. Fair enough. I thanked the spirit, my hand still on the planchette. "I appreciate your answers, friend." To my surprise, in a strange synergy between me and the spirit, I felt compelled to move the planchette again. It was the fastest it had ever been this time, as it covered the following letters. "Tell everyone else to leave." Huh. My friends looked at me skeptically as I said the letters at a time. "Are you sure you didn't just force that on purpose?" asked Eleonora. I assured her I definitely didn't. That was definitely from the spirit. At this point, this had been the most clearly supernatural phenomena I'd ever experienced in my life, and I was excited to keep it going. My friends, usually unflinching and made of ice, were a little bit thrown. Eleonora and Martin looked ever so slightly spooked, but Kev was willing to go with it. "Might as well see where this goes," Kev said as he started climbing down from the treehouse. With a slight bit of hesitation, Eleonora and Martin followed suit. Sweet. An actually creepy night. I embraced the quiet amidst the lighting of the candles and the power of the Ouija board. I geared up for my next question. I wasn't going to hold back. Spirit, how will I die? I took in a deep breath, waiting for some movement. Slowly. Depends. Interesting answer, if not a bit underwhelming. I geared up for my follow-up. "Oh, come on, Spirit. What about something a bit more specific?" My hand moved with the planchette to the following letters. I tried hard to focus and connect the letters since I didn't have anyone to transcribe with me. "What is your name?" Weird. Completely dodged my question and asked me my name. Okay, all-knowing spirit. I assumed you'd already know that. I decided to try tricking it. "My name is Belle." Movement from the planchette on the Ouija board. It took me to the letters. Do not lie. Well played, spirit. I gave the spirit my actual name, Jennifer, and continued to see the follow-up response. "What is your favorite food?" Honoring the spirit's rules, I opted to tell the truth instead of following up with another lie. Your girl loves donair, and this spirit deserves to know that. The Ouija board's response. Correct. Before I could take in the affirmation from the spirit, who was asking who questions here, spirit, it followed up with yet another question. What is your biggest fear? Do not lie. This question took me aback a bit. I wasn't really afraid of anything, or so I thought, so I struggled with it. It took me a few moments. I really thought of it. I kind of cringed at the answer, but it was my truth. Something horrible happening to my little brother. No movement from the Ouija board. Seconds turned into minutes as I kept my hand awkwardly placed on the planchette. Then, finally, "Thank you," said Eleonora. "Welp," I obliged. I thanked the spirit for its time and decided to climb down from the treehouse, where my friends were waiting. I passed on the spirit's message and told Eleonora that it was her turn. Martin, Kev, and I spent what must have been 15 minutes standing outside the treehouse while Eleonora was up there. We'd pulled drinks out of our bags and were discussing my experience with the Ouija board so far. Both were incredibly surprised when I told them that the spirit was asking me questions. What kinds of questions? Generic stuff like my name, favorite food, etc., I answered. Weird. Both Kev and Martin seemed a bit thrown off by it, but I was excited. We looked up at the treehouse as we heard the sounds of someone climbing down. Eleonora had finished her session. She looked traumatized. "How was it?" I asked her. "Weird. All it did was ask me questions. Questions like, Kevin asked her. My name, my favorite hobby, my, biggest fear. That one took me a while to answer. Kev turned to me. That is a little bit eerie, he said. I agreed. Didn't look like Eleonora was loving it either. But still, a spirit asking us questions. This had been one of the coolest, if not the coolest, paranormal experiences I'd ever experienced in my life. Eleonora turned to Martin. It said that you were up next. Martin's session seemed longer than the others. We stood outside, drinking, talking about the happenings so far, and pulling out the occasional snack. That was a little bit traumatizing, said Eleonora. Kevin pointed to her and then up to the treehouse. Agreed, this is kind of messed up, he said. Yeah, but that's the point, I responded. We seek out spooky happenings all the time, and we never get lucky. This is an actual legit supernatural experience. I feel like we have to take advantage of it. Even if it's asking us personal stuff. What does it want this info for? Followed up Eleonora. I shrugged. While the biggest fear question was pretty weird, I didn't feel too worried that a spirit knew my favorite food was, or what my name was. Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of someone climbing down from the treehouse. Martin had finished up his session. It felt like it had been 30 minutes, which topped the rest of our sessions. We bombarded Martin with questions as he reached the ground. He looked more shell-shocked than Eleonora did. That was pretty fucked up, he started. What did it ask you? I asked enthusiastically. My biggest fear, Martin responded. It's weird, but it felt like it didn't like my answer to that one. It almost seemed annoyed. Huh, so was it just silent for a while after that? I asked. No, it asked me way more things after that. What the happiest moment of my life was, who I was the most jealous of, what my biggest life dream was, all that stuff. It was a lot of questions. Then, finally, it just wrapped up with thank you, and that was that. Martin turned to Kevin. You're up next. Kevin turned to all of us. Here goes nothing. He sighed and started climbing up to the treehouse. We watched him make his way to the top. For the first time in the evening, I had a knot in my stomach. Only 5 minutes had passed since Kevin first went up, but he was already climbing down. He was shaking his head as he made his way down the ladder and to our group. Fuck that, said Kevin. What happened? We asked him. He just shook his head. That shit is dangerous. We need to get the fuck out of here ASAP. I'd never seen Kevin like this. He was uncharacteristically shook. You have to tell us more. What did it ask you? What did it say? But Kevin ignored all of our questions. He started packing up his bag. You guys can play with fire if you want, but I'm out of here. I suggest you guys come too, he said. I watched as Martin and Eleonora started packing up as well. I had bad feelings throughout this whole thing. I think we should leave, said Martin. Guys, what the hell? Just because it's unsettling doesn't mean we have to pack up. We can just hang out up there and do something else, I said back. This doesn't feel right, said Eleonora. I watched them as they all took a few steps away from the treehouse and towards the forest. You coming? Asked Kevin. I stood my ground. Kevin just shook his head and started heading out on his way. Suit yourself. I had no idea what could have possibly happened up there that would have shook him this much. He had already started walking as Martin and Eleonora pleaded with me to come with them. I said no. Begrudgingly, they all left. You're probably wondering, wasn't I scared? Especially now that I was alone. The answer was yes. But something in my soul told me that I was up next. I'd spent my whole life waiting for something that was truly supernatural to happen, and now it was in front of me. With my fingers jittering, I climbed up to the treehouse as my friends departed. It took me a moment to pull together the bravery to put my hand on the planchette. The candles were still lit. The setting was just right. Finally, I spoke to the spirit again. Why are you asking us all these questions? Nothing for a few minutes. Then, my hand moved with the planchette, slower than usual. The answer, to confirm my suspicions. Confirm your suspicions of what? Movement from the planchette on the Ouija board. One of you is not who you say you are. What are you talking about? I heard blood-curdling shrieks coming from the forest outside the treehouse, like nothing I'd ever heard before. What the fuck? The planchette was moving on its own now. I watched it go from letter to letter. That is not Kevin. He is coming back for you. Run. And so I did. The small section of the city I live in is generally known to be haunted. I think I know why. It's time for me to leave.